This discussion is about performance analysis, both in terms of reviewing where we've been since fundamentally the start of the industry, and then also looking at trends and issues for the next growth period. That next growth period, I believe, is going to be a continued system-changing revolution, sports system I'm talking about there, as opposed to just a continuing evolution. Slide from a 2006 presentation when we were starting to talk about the integrative science, which was part of the industry of performance analysis. Integrative science discussion back then was moving away from the concept of silos more later and moving into the ability for information to actually be shared across subdisciplines in the sports sciences. Just trying to establish here a position to move on from in talking about the industry of performance analysis. Our job is to create an environment where success is inevitable, is a sign from above a swimming center and an American NCAA system. Take that idea further. If we're trying to make long-term behavior change, then it's about adopting internationally competitive attitude systems. If you want to be competitive, find out what your opposition is doing and do at least that. Assisting athletes in developing and fine-tuning their daily training environments. In red, this requires a process of assessing, intervening with athletes, monitoring their performance, monitoring their training, monitoring their lifestyles, and constant reinforcement of things that are working. The performance analysis industry fits into this kind of environment. So what we're about is providing systematic, structured feedback. And of course, where that might have started in the early days in fairly specific stuff to do with video, the potential now across a whole range of modalities, a whole range of channels, is incredible the way that things are growing. But again, if we look at what we do as performance analysts, then you're looking at planning processes, collecting information, compiling, interpreting data, analyzing data, communicating those results, communicating those trends, incorporating that within athlete preparation programs. So from that perspective, in the discussions that were happening in the early 2000s, a lot of the traditional thinkers were challenged by the concept of just where does performance analysis fit in? And in a typical top left kind of organization chart, it was hard to sort of ping it somewhere. Some organizations put it under biomechanics. Some organizations actually found clean air and put it there by themselves. Some organizations were really challenged to actually find out exactly or figure out exactly where they wanted to put it. But I think around that mid-2000 period, we saw a bit of a paradigm shift, a thinking shift, a concept change that saw performance analysis actually as a tool of integration. Slowly uptaken at first and resisted, I must say, by quite a few various branches of the sports sciences. But again, just trying to paint the picture here of what it is that we're reviewing and what it is we're looking at, how it's evolving. Questions that we were asking pretty hard back in that middle 2000 time was, should we be designing and training, planning organizations, setting up institutions, setting up facilities, equipping performance analysts for 15 to 20 years off in the future based on a 15 to 20-year-old system, that is the older-fashioned style of organization chart. The concept that really gained traction was this one about one set of data holding multiple information about performance, as opposed to multiple sets of data coming from different directions, an Excel spreadsheet held by one particular subdiscipline, a database held by another, some numbers coming from a max VO2 test in another area. If we are to genuinely achieve the potential of the performance analysis industry, then we're looking at a whole range of integrations. It is interesting that what's happened, particularly say in the last 5 years, has been an incredible growth of miniaturized technologies that unfortunately have left us back in exactly that same situation from the middle 2000s of multiple sets of data, possibly not talking as well as it could to each other. So from that kind of base, from that kind of preliminary assumptions, we're looking at what has been recognized as the performance analysis cycle, where a project is planned, there's equipment, time, schedule, so on and so forth, prepared to actually work on that particular project. In some instances, preparation for venue. I've been through situations where we've cabled venues. Now, of course, it's more looking at quality Wi-Fi, or it may be for some of the pro football codes actually getting access to video in controlled settings. Clearly the capturing of information, the coding of the information that is happening there in the performance in the competition. A lot of post-production work that goes on, turning information around, turning video around. Obviously one of the biggest areas that we've actually saved time in through a lot of these technologies. The absolute analysis of trends, of data, of the performance obviously itself, how that information is then presented, how ready the organization, how ready the athletes, how ready the coaches are to actually use that or engage in that kind of technology or that kind of data collection, the way that the organization actually uses it. I'm aware of some coaches who've become performance analysts who basically are allowed to be there, but in some instances ignored because other leaders or coaches involved in the particular program either are uncomfortable with it, don't understand the technology behind it, or want to be particularly protective of their own approach. Athletes getting access to, being able to utilize the information. These days, of course, that's far more compressed. It's far more portable media. It's far more, devices that allow them to basically live their lives. Trend analysis, is the bigger picture stuff, and obviously the issue about keeping all of that project, which could be one game or it could be one Olympic cycle, in some place, has been constantly challenging the idea of just how much video do you keep and how do you actually find the best places to store it. In August 2007, I spoke at this conference, and we actually asked the question at the time, where are we at now? So if you look across the performance analysis cycle there, and given the idea of a double plus being a particularly high standard, it's interesting to look at what I saw at the time as the range of how well, as an industry, we were dealing with these sorts of things. There was some very creative stuff going on, hence the double plus kind of scores. And there were some areas down the bottom where if you looked at the lower end of the application of the performance analysis technologies, there was an awful lot of had bought the equipment but had not really engaged in the potential that actually existed within the area. But I think in many instances it was also a lack of analysts. It was a lack of people who had had a chance to actually fully understand what the systems were capable of as well. If we overlay a view now, you'll notice I've added a triple plus. In most instances, I believe the bottom end has improved. I think we're having some much more quality standards, for want of a term, being identified and being worked to. As an industry grows, things become competitive, and I believe that we've started to see that sort of situation, where not only is it one sport, within one sport, one team not wanting another competitive team to be aware of some of the initiatives that they're involved in, but the ability to turn information around and actually embrace it within the program and have an influence, have an outcome on program performance. By definition, again, if you want to be competitive, find out what your opposition's doing, do at least that. The bottom end of all these graphs has gone up. The top end is nice to look at. I think some of the best performers, some of the best subgroups within this industry are now really pushing some new boundaries in the kind of detail encoding, in the kind of turning around of information, certainly in the ability to analyze the information that's collected from training and from competitive settings, how it's presented, links even in with the public relations side of organizations, an ability for the organization to access information for promotion, the readiness of organizations, the readiness of coaches, the readiness of athletes to actually utilize the information. I don't believe we're a triple plus all the way through, and if we do this analysis again in 7 years' time, I would be hoping there'd be a 5 plus at the top there, and that we'd actually have some very obvious leaders in some of those areas. If performance analysis as an industry was actually to have an annual awards ceremony, who would be putting their hand up to be nominated or be included in thinking for being the one that won the post-production award, the one that should actually be recognized for their system preparation for project handling. Interesting kinds of questions. So where to from here? Well, what system issues still remain? There's a lot of reluctance to embrace technology. There's cost issues. There's budgets that are being stretched. There's acceptance from old head coaches or lack of acceptance from old head coaches. There's a whole range of issues that we still need to operate under, and a lot of those restrictions are the kinds of things we've already raised. I'm going to address some of the questions on that page as we go further through this conversation, but I suspect that it's only now and coming into this next period where we're really going to be able to add some measures of the true performance indicators, the true performance parameters across sports. And I think that capability is coming because of miniaturization. And I think there's a whole range of issues that are coming up in wearable technology, which from one side it's a buzz, it's great, we're getting access to stuff we've never been able to measure before. But on the other side, there's resistances within wearable technology, and back with system issues, there's rules, there are sport rules that tend to lag well behind some of the technological advances. So there's a lot of challenges still left. One of the ones, which is a very contemporary issue, which I'm sure you've been aware of, is the discussion about athlete welfare or athlete, particularly mental illness, the depression, anxiety kind of stuff that's getting a lot of coverage. We have a lot of technology which we're putting on the ground, or in the air, I suppose you could say as well, in sport these days. And the question really needs to be asked from a upper level management or an advanced planning. Is there something we could be doing here to actually join in the athlete welfare monitoring process, as well as actually the performance analysis process? And then, of course, the next question, as you've already heard at this conference, there's applications outside the traditional athlete coach. Well, clearly, the team and the athlete are the ones that have been looked at significantly with this kind of technology, this kind of industry. But what about turning the mirror back around to the coach and, more importantly, support staff? And I really like the trends that are happening within the medical group, where a surgical team will actually immediately after a surgery or a surgical procedure turn back around and review the timing, the positioning, the accuracy, the correct knowledge being applied. I don't think we're doing enough of that, and I think that probably needs to add back to the performance analysis cycle as another evaluation area, for want of a term. But let's stay within the concept of what system issues still remain. We still see silo thinking going on. We still see people coming out of university environments in the sports science area hanging on to what's been around for a long time. I'm a physiologist. Basically, my data lives here. I don't see anybody else would have a need to share in it, etc., etc. And this leads to ridiculous duplications of data collection. The number of times athletes get asked the same set of questions for each of those groups to actually establish their own databases and understandings of athletes, is quite a farce. Also the perception of people working within those various areas about the concept of one set of data, or the preparedness to accept the concept of one set of data, is again one of our major challenging or limiting issues at the moment. I mean, there are so many sports that have clearly embraced their own versions of technology. There's so many venues that have actually facilitated the collection of data. There's so much information that is collected. Not sure all the time it's necessarily driven by the coach, and that obviously can create some kind of issues in relation to take up and full acceptance. But the full performance planning or the performance analysis project planning process should really involve all of those subdisciplines, and all those subdisciplines basically should be looking forward to having data that they can interpret from their own perspective, as well as from the integrative perspective of the total athlete performance. This should also be facilitating a number of communication systems between those areas. And once again, I'd be sort of a bit reluctant to say that we're really setting the kind of trends that we're capable of setting in being able to share that information, but also to use that technology as a communication development system. one of the challenges that we all face across all the subdisciplines in sports science is ecological validity, is what we're working on in training situations valid in relation to the competition environment. And it's not until we can start to look at real-time data collected with miniaturized sensors that we can really start to either validate some of the training procedures that we're going through or even some of the long-held beliefs, if you like, that are part of the coaching myth and lore. We know in golf, for instance, you can actually hit a hook, a ball going right to left in the air for a right-hander with an open club face. That knowledge has been gained from the use of the TrackMan, the radar-based ball tracking systems, which also pick up information about the club face. I'm well aware of the AFL experience of making changes to their physiological training structures or systems based on the GPS data that was collected in the early days. There is so much more to ask and so much more to understand about what it is we're actually asking athletes to do. In 2005-06, we were talking about the ideal being portable service teams that were in situ, basically collecting information. And I've personally been involved with the design and the construction of a range of training and competitive facilities around the world in different sports. I don't know that it's one of the first things to be on people's mind to actually build capability into facilities. But once the issues are raised and the points are discussed, there's a pretty quick take-up from my experience of people being prepared to add in cabling, to add in camera positions, to add in Wi-Fi structures, opportunities for communication within the venue, and obviously then linkages with a competitive training environment. Sorry, competitive performance environment. Again, from the middle 2000s kind of period, we were asking questions about what's the last 5 minutes of a first half of football interesting? Who's it interesting to? And it actually should be interesting to a lot of people, but as you can see here, probably from slightly different perspectives. Well aware of some of the things that were being done in Welsh rugby, where the one set of information, the one set of game video, for want of a term, was then interpreted with different coding systems with different professionals within the coaching staff. But I think we're talking a bit more than that. I think we're talking about using the digital video as the information carrier and then adding information to that digital video, so that it obviously increases our capability of searching for specific relationships that are within the data, but also so that we start breaking down the silos and get people seeing what is the essence of performance, which is the individual's performance, as opposed to a highly specific kind of approach from one particular sports science area. So again, we come back to the questions. What system issues still remain? I think there's a lot of sophistication, growth that still needs to go on within our sports systems, a lot of management education, and a lot of people being prepared at a funding level, at a management and decision-making level to fully embrace the capabilities and the possibilities of this. And of course, we're all involved in that project to make sure that they actually do learn more, understand more. And of course, it's an important thing to make sure that any kind of communications we have with those people are actually in English, so that it's very easy to jargonize technology and come with our own sort of set of terminologies. But it's also very important that it's promoted outside the industry itself in a very easily understandable kind of way. So again, when we ask questions about wearable technology, miniaturization, the other area I really want to talk on here is the concept of big data. And that's why I think we're in a massive growth spurt right now as an industry. But let's dive in again. These are some of the kinds of things that really weigh on performance. Reaction times. One thing to do it in a laboratory with a visual board and looking at choice reaction time and so on and so forth. But can we really say we're measuring reaction time in situ? Touch, tension control, technical control, applied power. It's such a fascinating area. I mean, we're looking at going back into the pure biomechanical kind of stuff with transducers and so on and so forth to provide feedback. But are we doing it as well as we can? Are we actually linking emotional control or emotional tendencies, patterns with touch? Are we linking ability to retain balance with agility, technique, balance? Are we looking at ways of combining people's typical tension control or lack of and associated concentration with their ability to stay balanced? They're things we've looked at for an awfully long time, and we all have our own approaches to talk about center of gravity control or to talk about tension control. But are we measuring them? And are we actually coming into an environment where we can measure those? And I think the answer clearly is yes. In fact, you can ask questions like these: what predictors are there for performance under pressure? And all of a sudden you start getting into probably like combinations of the human factors, and you come now into more of a concept of individual athletes having typical patterns of reactions. And if you go back to the human factors approach, you go back to if we can measure it, we can then actually potentially provide feedback, and we can then provide some kind of improvements in training for those particular individual projects. So here's a combination set of, a set of those kind of combination sciences. I mean, energy levels are a direct predictor of performance. Athletes' composure are a direct predictor of their performance, their levels of commitment, their coachability. So you can move into something along this lines here where we're actually trying to come with a stress profile for each individual, an idea which has had a lot of traction around the world. A lot of coaches, a lot of programs like the idea of this, and we can obviously turn it into a whole range of different ways of looking at an individual profile. I mean, here we've got somebody who under pressure starts to press, they sort of back off a little bit, become a bit defensive, keep an okay focus, but there's a little bit of distractibility coming in, their technique starts to break down, their rhythm control, they start rushing, center of gravity control, tension, loss of balance becomes an issue, their energy levels, they become running around like a bit of a mad thing, their composure sort of goes along with that, stop using routines, become a little bit shut down to coaching comments, still stay fairly committed, but thankfully in this particular individual's approach, they actually stay communicative as opposed to getting quite withdrawn. So, sorry, I think I might have said that the risk management one, the individual starts pressing, it's actually they stay high percentage. This kind of approach is good, but it's very subjective. We need to be able to start building in observation sets and measurements that go along with a lot of those areas and be able to combine it to time-coded information-rich video. That would be a great individual to have in your team, someone who in pressure situations doesn't become a bit of a victim, of the environment or the distractibility or their own mentality. Wanted to raise this area as well here, and that's the concept of the well-being and the welfare stuff. And again, lots of discussion around the sport industry at the moment about athlete welfare, particularly the mental illness kind of stuff. This is from the Lane 4 group in UK, a very interesting group, basically taking what they were involved in sport into the business environment. And this particular chart I love. If you put a percentage next to each of the four main business drivers of well-being, innovation, internal processes, and achievement, obviously percentage adds up to 100, then it's a reflection of the kind of drivers, the kind of culture, if you like, that's actually within the organization. So if the organization was all about doing the right thing by internal processes and all about achievements, say in fact 40% for each one of those, and then actually only allocated 20% to well-being of the staff and the athletes and being innovative, then I think that's sort of, to me, feels a bit like a public service organization, certainly not a high-performance one. If you had a situation where internal processes, ticking all the boxes and so on and so forth, was actually down at 5 or 10% because it was so system-driven, and there were particular people whose job was to make sure those were happening, but not load on coaches and load on other people's time. If the focus, yes, was on achieving, but again, it was achieving because of the way we do things, and there was large creativity involved, and there was a considerable focus on athlete well-being, Well, I have a suspicion that that might be more of a picture of what it is we're looking for in high-performance organizations. The question again is, are we measuring things that can actually load in that? If we're taking a cross-sports science view, are we actually able to come with an understanding of some of these areas that you wouldn't be able to come in with just coming from a single perspective or a single sports science specialty? I just want to jump back again to some presentations from the middle 2000s. This was actually at the Commonwealth Games Conference in Melbourne in 2006, and we were talking still about this concept of integrating service, but also looking at predicting some trends in performance analysis. And the way we went about that was to actually have a little look at, I think this should come up here, yeah. This was a document that was produced by the Central Intelligence Agency. Rather interesting, but it's a document that identified some large trends towards 2020. In fact, the document was about, and in red, it was almost like a reality check. You know, populations are going to change, divergent aging trends are going to happen, technology will alter outcomes, governments won't make decisions, people will decide. You know, we've seen all this over quite some time. Science and technology will grow at an incredible rate. They saw particularly when it was produced in the early 2000s that IT and biotechnology were major growth areas. They also saw the risk is that future conflict would actually be around or be utilizing some of the science and technological developments. If you look at that and actually overlay, well, what have we done in that period of time? You know, going from a brick mobile phone through to, you know, GPS locators on players in training sessions, et cetera, and in games. We've actually also picked up and gone along with a lot of those kinds of trends. I have to throw a couple of these in. I'll provide you with the references to some of these materials, but the technology revolution up in the top left, talking about, you know, going from calculators through computers into, you know, basically Wi-Fi and web-based and cloud-based and so on and so forth. One of the big tickets that was identified back then for basically opening the doors to the technology revolution as we are seeing right now was the need for multidisciplinary training and multidisciplinary degrees. We're still not seeing enough of that. I love the quote on the right. The world's changed. This calls for a fundamental shift in technology development from a focus on delivering devices to basically how people use them. And I think we've, again, take that concept and take it into, well, so are we just about filming, measuring, recording, or are we actually into the nuances of how athletes in their own ways interact with a competitive environment, and are we actually able to understand those integrations, those combinations of attitude, of physical training, of opportunities, etc., etc. So this one, I think it says a lot that unfortunately organizing and managing the data and finding a given piece of rich data in a terabyte-sized storage system is a huge problem. Well, I've got sitting in front of me right now probably about 50 terabytes of drives, and I'm suspecting that a lot of the organizations have something similar. But the principle of storage and the principle of data searching across those has always been one of our biggest challenges within PA. So now we have a chance to have a little look at the future, or maybe the current. Really interesting article from Computer Weekly where it took a chance to actually explain about big data and really responding, I suppose, in many ways to the fact that big data storage is a bit of an issue, or is a major issue. At the bottom, there's a simple definition from the article. It's big data is about large amounts of data, fine, but it's also about ways of running analytics on those large data sets. And the reference in the article was to Facebook, Google, and Amazon, and what they're basically doing, and you join in that every day that you actually go onto one of their sites, is they're using incredible analytical structures to piece together a whole range of information about your searching tendencies, your interests on the line, and so on and so forth, with an intention of being able to trigger targeted advertisers on pages that you actually would go to. The concept of an unstructured data set is something we're all familiar with. It's collecting info on a video camera, collecting info on a heart rate monitor, collecting information on a GPS, collecting information on whatever else would happen to be. And those data sets, from a naive perspective, being unrelated, from a clever perspective or an integrative perspective, they are obviously highly related. But it's then a question of being able to actually do the analysis on it and come with the information, the linkages, the kind of trends that are in there on an individual perspective. The four logos at the bottom, leave mine out in the bottom right for the moment, but CBA, Australia Post, Woolworths, and Telstra are all well down the line in running incredible analytic programs that provide them with some of the most phenomenal interrelated information about an individual's style, interest, expenditure levels, and so on and so forth. In fact, if you chase around a little bit on that, Woolworths invested in May of 2013 $20 million by buying a data analytic group or merging with them in some way, Quantium. And that's a 50% stake, I think, that Woolies actually took with them. Interestingly, the one in the middle there is actually from Advertising News. Woolworths fires a big data warning shot. Agencies slow off the mark. Woolies was seeing the value in being able to do that kind of analysis through their loyalty structures before their advertising groups possibly actually recognized the value in it. The one on the right-hand side is an article just from recently that they're very much projecting a growth in earnings based on the way they've been able to save costs in advertising and target specific purchasers through their loyalty structures. And the one on the bottom left is again very recent. And I heard this at some stage not so long back, and I really was wondering about, is this true? But this is what it said. What Woolworths has been able to do is take their insurer's car crash database, overlay it with our Woolworths rewards database. An actuary, by the way, is a guy who basically sits in a room punching numbers all the time and gets really impressed with the patterns in numbers. So seeing an actuary get excited must have been quite an interesting thing to do there. They're saying that the relationships they found were statistically significant to the point where they're comfortable to say that they can tailor an insurance offer that targets really good insurance risk customers rather than spending money hodgepodge through advertising by targeting people because of the relationships they've found within their data. I suspect there'll be a couple of people who drink milk and eat lots of red meat sitting there in the room, and it would appear that those people are very good car insurance risks. So anybody else, I think you really want to ring me when you actually go driving so I'm aware of it. That could be a set of information there that could be taken as a joke, but I suspect a group like Woolworths doesn't invest that kind of money on a whim. You see increasing discussion through the sites at the moment about the next revolution in sport is about big data, and there's obviously already been a little bit of a movie link with that, and that was the Moneyball movie where the concept of sabermetrics came out of that. It says in the top there that whilst calculations have been employed since the dawn of athletics, it's a question of what kind of info source, what kind of data source is actually allowing those calculations to be made. And I suspect, again, you're quite aware of the evolution of the software that SAP, the German company, was involved with the World Cup team, using players' biometric data during training, along with other historical and other information that they collect, through this performance analysis process. That kind of discussion jumps into sports like golf. Great example of the kind of miniaturization and the kind of detail information is what we do in golf. We're using radars to track ball flight track golf club movement, looking at putting sensors in and on golf clubs to pick up face angles and alignments at impact and so on and so forth. One of the things that we tend to see in golf, though, is the fact that there might be a range of assessment protocols and a range of devices being used that don't necessarily talk to each other, some that actually have their own space in the cloud for where the data actually goes, some that have you can't break into their analytics and you can't break into their assumptions, so you can't really do the tests. Got to take it on full value, trust value, so on and so forth. It's interesting that this guy, Tom Brewster Fox, who writes for The Guardian, seems to be a bit of an advocate of data analytics in sport. I love the comment underneath the right-hand side that analytics is serious in sport when the Massachusetts Institute of Technology shows an interest. There's obviously a lot of groups that are out there and doing things, one to gain a competitive advantage, but another to actually push the integration of this kind of data. We've been well aware for a long time, obviously, of Formula One teams collecting data from drivers, so on and so forth during races, and being able to utilize that. Interesting, because that's data being used in a live performance, turned around rather expensively, but turned around in actually being able to facilitate the performance of the vehicle and the driver. I know the Formula One sailing has done similar kinds of things. I think the challenges we've got is again, is the data reliable? Is the way that we're actually transmitting the data, whether it be Bluetooth, Wi-Fi linkages, whether it be other opportunities that are still to come to us, are those sources of data reliable? Can we make sure that we actually can track an entire set of performance because the information is going to be coming through? There's other questions about are we really at a stage now where the high cost technology such as the TrackMan in golf, which is still a $25,000 device, whether that is actually perhaps moving now to a periodic assessment tool usage, and it's being replaced by some of the miniaturized $150 kind of devices. One of the real issues that we're finding there when we're actually doing cross-validations is that the $150 devices don't come with interpretation manuals. So the risk is that the kind of interpretations that would come from professional sports science people using the more expensive /laboratory type gear, that kind of interpretation is that we're actually losing some control of that when some of these miniaturized things are getting into the marketplace. No reason to say it shouldn't happen, but certainly a reason to say there's a whole bunch of issues we've got to take care of there. I want to talk a bit about psychophysiology, and psychophysiology is basically the way you think is the way you feel. We've done an awful lot of work over 30-odd years in biofeedback training, where you're measuring body signals, playing them back to the athlete, usually in a laboratory-based training environment. We've been pushing for so long to see the kind of in situ collection and turnaround heads-up displays. For downhill skiers would just be the most phenomenal kind of thing. Obviously, it builds in a potential further distraction for the athlete, but if we're looking at being able to make intelligent decisions, strategic decisions during performances, then the kind of information that we're moving towards being collectible, the ground's moving, guys. I mean, the situation's getting to the point where we're not just talking in relaxed environments about what you should do when your heart rate goes up, but we're actually getting opportunities to train those control skills in real performance settings. The hexaskin demonstration that you've seen in the conference on Friday afternoon, to me is just, this is where it's going, and I cannot see that it's going to go backwards. I can see that there's going to be a whole bunch of challenges with sports coming with rules, particularly when the rules were written in a time when they didn't even know what a computer was. Just a slide from back one of those earlier presentations. When we're looking into the future, there's a constant issue about challenging current thinking, and I think we're about to see another challenge to what might have already become 7-8-year-old traditional thinking in PA. That when we start looking at the real potential for convergence and the real potential for bringing information together from a number of perspectives. I think that's going to be a major, major challenge. In fact, if I was to go a bit further, I believe that one of the biggest challenges we've got right now is that no one's being taught to do that. In fact, if you think about what the hexaskin can actually produce, and if you think about it sampling on a 400 hertz cycle or something along those lines, and you think about it being worn by 11, 13, whatever it is, people are out there in the field, and you think about that information coming in real time, and you think about the driver behind the investment in that, being able to actually utilize that information during a competition situation, then who's skilled to do those interpretations at the moment? Who's skilled to be able to turn that data around at the moment? Do we go in the Woolworths direction and look at some of the big data analytic packages? Or is that actually what the sports code systems really facilitate? Is that what the CODA type system really needs to work towards? Some of the other discussions here, and I just thought I'd show you a couple of pickies. There's an astronaut wearing some very high quality stuff from Thought Technology. It's the FlexComp information. We were using that back in the 80s. I've still got access to a set of it somewheres, and it's great stuff, but it's totally useless because of the fact that it requires wired sensors and sometimes even gels and so on and so forth. The stuff from NeuroSky, which is a group out of South California, the stuff from the Hexaskin people, that's really where we need to be moving. Portability. But again, you'd probably be aware that there's a lot of discussion around, mainly around the Google Glass kind of stuff, about just how people are either accepting or perhaps having gone there really rejecting wearable technologies. And some of that comes back to the concept of privacy. I mean, who actually owns the data? We may have to be changing some of the things that people sign when they come into competitive programs, high-performance programs, that basically say that we will be collecting this kind of information about you and using it with you. If you look at the Hexaskin website and listen to some of the discussions, I think there's a ice hockey player that talks about not really wanting to put the hand up when a coach says, how are you feeling? But if you got information that basically says he's stressed and he's actually being challenged physiologically right now, get him off the ice, get him off the field. That's, again, you go back and you visit the player welfare stuff. If you think about the concussion stuff right now, and when an athlete is in a concussion-producing or a likely concussion situation in the field, there are rules within some sports that basically say he's removed almost straight away, like the blood bin stuff. But more importantly, rules that don't allow that person obviously to re-enter the game, but potentially not re-enter the game for some period of time afterwards. So we're going to come up against some of those kinds of issues when we're dealing with being able to collect more detailed information like this. There'll be ethicists, there'll be people that will talk about the fact that we're dehumanizing sport. I've long passed that. Elite level sport is actually about who can do it better, so I see it as more human empowering to actually have this kind of feedback information. But again, there's going to be quite some interesting discussions around the use of these technologies and how controllable the data is. Gambling, match fixing, there are big challenges in sport across the world. Maybe there's going to be more information than just pitch reports, huh? That might somehow or other get out of the way here. And I have to come relatively quickly to a finish here, but let's talk about the human rights issue, which is that we actually are supposed to be treating individuals as individuals. And if you think about it, unless you actually fully understand who that person is and how they tick, what challenges they face in competitive situations, and help that person actually understand that and learn how to deal with it themselves, then other than that, we're actually not respecting the principle of individuality. And potentially in there's other breaks of human, taking care of people in a welfare sense, if you like, human rights. My finish point here is actually on the Senate inquiry, which was run last year. It was run by the Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport References Committee. Interesting kind of group, but the practice of sports sciences in Australia was actually about the whole conversations around ASADA, around the peptides, around match fixing, so on and so forth, and there was a knee-jerk reaction for government to put some kind of inquiry together. One of the things that really came out of it was, and again, the integrity debate is, are we doing this the right way? Are we doing this the right way for individuals? Are we doing this the right way for the sport itself, the country's image in many respects as well? Things can get elevated pretty quickly. One of the things that came out of it was, so what makes you a sports scientist? What makes you a sports psychologist? What makes you a medical professional, a sports physician, let's say? And a lot of that searching, a lot of that review was about professional membership bodies. It was about kind of organizations that actually are around sport that accredit or approve people's practice. And there are, and have been for some time, a number of the subdisciplines within sports science medicine that are registered by a government organization referred to as AHPRA, the Australian Health Practitioners Regulation Agency. And the thing that concerns, when we ask the question, where does PA sit in the great integrity debate, is that this is a particular page from the Senate inquiry, the paper, the review that was written, the report that was written. And you notice that doctors, physios, psychologists have a registration group. They have professional bodies. They are, in terms of the Senate inquiry people, okay to practice because they've actually got structures that control what they can and can't do. Chiropractors are in there. Sports dietitians aren't registered. Sports scientists aren't registered. Strength and conditioning people aren't registered. The three groups that the highest risk of ingesting or injecting the wrong thing for the wrong reasons are not registered. But for the performance analysis industry, check out the blue box. Performance analysis is actually linked or listed with biomechanics in the review. And again, there's no registration. There's, I think if you go back to a page before, there's a reference to International Society of Performance Analysis in Sport at the darker blue box at the top. But there's certainly not a professional membership body in Australia. Performance analysis is facing the imposition of a registration system, which basically means we're talking about ethics, we're talking about setting some professional standards for the industry. I suspect that what we've covered is a wide range. Let's just go back to that last one again. I suspect what we've covered is a wide range of issues that relate to where we're going. I think it's a very exciting time. I think the integration of micro circuitry and the ability to collect information in situ is just going to be a massive growth, but I think the biggest risk we've got in there is actually being able to interpret it in the right way. And I think there will be a group of professionals working within the PA industry. Some of them are probably training now, some of them possibly haven't even started being trained, who will be highly skilled and highly sought after in their ability to interpret information which is collected across a wide range of parameters in real competitive settings. Thanks for your attention.